Okay, we'll go for it. Okay, everyone, I think we're ready to start. We're just a few minutes over, so we will get cracking. I think we wanted to say a very warm welcome to this workshop and presentation this afternoon, but we are aware it's freezing in here, so you might need to put a coat on to keep warm. I think the air conditioning's on a bit full blast at the moment. But welcome to this presentation and workshop. My name is Jane Pye and I'm a social work lecturer at Lancaster University, and I do have a background in social work practice. Colin, I'll ask you to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Colin Turbett. I'm a retired social worker from Scotland and a social work author, and I'm particularly interested in community social work, and that's something that Jane and I have been collaborating over for some time now.
Yeah, so it's really nice to be here presenting with Colin, but also particularly lovely for me to be in Scotland and escape from the north of England for a while. As you can see, the title of our session is Community Social Work and Climate Change, Practical Steps to Address Poverty and Injustice. So what we're hoping to do is take us through a few slides, not too many, and then have an opportunity for more of a discussion towards the end of the session. And we're really conscious, we've been sort of saying to each other all morning and into the afternoon that a lot of the points, I suppose, that we're thinking about in relation to this topic are definitely, unsurprisingly, themes of the day. So I'm sure there'll be some thoughts that you will have in this session that have also arisen for you in earlier sessions. But we wanted to start off by thinking about this concept of green social work, which, interestingly, I haven't heard be talked about in great depth so far today. And I'm sure many people will have heard of this, this idea of green social work, really sort of pushed forward and I suppose formulated into a coherent idea by the brilliant Leonard Dominelli, who I'm sure many people will also be very familiar with. And I think it's fair to say that we have a great deal of sort of time and respect for how she really was probably very forward-thinking in her work around linking social work with the natural environment, especially in relation to issues such as environmental justice, which started many years ago. So she's been a real trailblazer in this, I suppose, this encouragement for us to think in social work about the natural environment that obviously we should hold so precious. So green social work, by way of just kind of giving a quick overview for people maybe who aren't so familiar, it involves social workers working closely with people in their communities and through their everyday life practices to respect all living things alongside their socio-cultural and physical environment, develop empowering and sustainable relationships between people and their environments, advocate for the importance of embedding the social in all economic activities, including those aimed at eradicating poverty, question the relevance of an industrial model of development that relies on over-urbanisation and over-consumption as the basis for social progress, and I think we've definitely seen that as a theme throughout the day so far, and to promote social and environmental justice. So that's sort of an overview of this idea of green social work, which we find very interesting and very helpful. However, I think it's fair to say that we perhaps have come to a point where we also think that it is wonderful to have this work, but we need to start thinking about how it translates into practice. And I think that's always felt quite difficult for probably people like Colin and I who come with a very practice-orientated and perspective when thinking about social work. I think our question is always, so what does that actually mean for people who are juggling really high workloads and managing the complexities of working in a practice setting in a UK context, which is the context that we're familiar with. So I suppose in a way what we're trying to do today is begin to think about what does it mean to apply this idea of green social work. And as Colin has already said, we both have a real interest and are drawn to ideas continuously of community social work. So I just want to say a few words about community social work in a moment, and perhaps you'll begin to see what we think is a kind of argument to be made about how a real community-orientated approach to practice is much more likely to allow us to embed some of these ideas of green social work into everyday practice. So the underlying premise of community social work approaches, and again, I appreciate that lots of people will know this already. It does, oh, I've appeared on the screen, I wasn't expecting that. Gosh, thank you for getting rid of that. That just threw me completely. Sorry, underlying premises of community social work approaches. So this is an approach which recognises the diverse nature of communities, which I think immediately we can see has been relevant to thinking about ideas of green social work. It comes from a perspective of doing with, not to, and that's really important here. So we're thinking about positioning ourselves as social workers as real allies and not as kind of experts. And I think there's some kind of subtle differences between those kind of ways we understand our role. Top-down enablement for bottom-up action, which kind of, I guess, supports the ideas about working with people. Building on community assets and strengths, which I think has become a fairly common common language in social work with the growth of strengths-based approaches. De-individualisation of commonly experienced issues. And I think for me this is perhaps the real key about this idea of community social work, that actually what this idea suggests is we think about the experiences of communities as a whole, however you want to define communities. And we kind of move away from this pathologising that we do, I think we do, in social work through the case management, casework type model, which dominates contemporary social work practice in the UK, in my view. I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. And it allows or it encourages artistry and creativity, which certainly in my experience, I think social workers are usually extremely motivated to be creative and be kind of innovative in practice, but often are quite kind of constrained by the processes and the models that we're expected to work in. So we sort of think that, or I suppose our proposition is that probably if we really want to get hold of this idea of applying green social work principles into practice, we probably need to do that alongside developing a more community-orientated way of working. We're not convinced that we can really kind of address climate change issues through the current model. It's not that we can't do it, but it would be much easier and much more probably sustainable if we were enabled to work in a community social work way. So I suppose that automatically brings us to a question about, well, where is community social work? If people like Colin and I continuously banging on about this is a really great way of working and we should think about it, making sure we bring community back into social work, why aren't we doing that? Well, I suppose I've already made this point to some degree, that it really worries me that in the UK, social work, I'm talking particularly here about statutory settings, and I appreciate that social work happens in many places, but we are dominated by individual case management type approaches. It is very rare to see any other a genuine alternative to the kind of case management, casework, care management type approach. And some of us, me, might say that to some degree, this is perhaps by design. I think we know that these sorts of approaches developed through the onset of sort of managerialism and ideas around efficiency and all that kind of stuff. But by continuously working with people in individual ways, I would also argue that we don't allow for, or we certainly don't promote for community connection and kind of acts of solidarity and social action. It's much more difficult to do that when we're always working with individuals rather than groups of people who may be experiencing similar problems. And I think perhaps this comes from my more recent experience of working within social work education. What I really notice is that certainly students who I am very privileged to work with kind of think this individualised way of working is what social work is. So it's become, we've kind of lost the sense that we've created this individualised model. that is not what social work is. It's in place because we've made it be what social work is. There are other ways of practicing, I would argue. So again, thinking about the role, I guess, that I'm in at the moment. And it's come up a couple of times today about the role of education in how do we, or why is it perhaps that we are working in these very kind of, I suppose, dominant ways of working with people as cases, which is an awful term, which I also think is very pathologising of people's troubles and their experiences of challenge. Why is it that social work students who come through educational experiences, of course, to become qualified as a social worker, why have they not been taught about community social work? Particularly when you have people like me going on about this is a really important way of thinking about social work. And I think it's really worth just mentioning, and this was something that I found really surprising. I thought I was moving out of quite a restrictive statutory social work role into this sort of wonderful world of education where we'd sit around thinking and imagining how wonderful things could be, to find myself actually working in an educational system which is also subject to some of the challenges of what we might expect, or the challenges that we see across our public services. There's a really complex relationship between social work regulators, employers and professional bodies in social work education. And I'm sure, again, lots of people will know this, but we're quite limited in what we can teach on social work programmes. We kind of have to make sure we meet the requirements of regulators, and employers are very powerful in terms of what they expect our graduates to leave the programme knowing. And of course, what employers want is social workers who are ready to work in individual case management type models. There's also, and I think this is probably in the press a little bit more at the moment, there's very real pressures on the HEI higher education sector in the UK, and particularly in England, where I'm more familiar. There are very, very real financial issues about how to sustain offering some degree programmes. I'm not just talking about social work here, I'm talking about more generally. People will know that students pay fees to come to university, and actually what that means is that lots of programmes, lots of qualifying programmes really require students in numbers in order to kind of pay for the programme to run. So that means that you kind of, as an educator, you kind of have to keep people happy because you're trying to attract students. It's the kind of market model. Which again means that it can be quite difficult to teach what we might think is a more radical or more critical perspective in relation to social work. That's not to say it doesn't happen, it just happens kind of slightly under the radar, I think. And this altogether sort of results in very limited opportunities to introduce students, our new future social work colleagues, to ideas around community social work practice, which I find really frustrating, but explains perhaps why we don't see this kind of embedding of community ideas in students. I think what tends to happen actually is when people have been in practice for a while, it's at that stage people begin to recognise through their own experience the value of working in a more community-orientated way. And our sort of, I suppose, argument here is that to really address issues of environmental injustice and to work within those principles of green social work, to support and to help be part of the challenge of managing and dealing with and addressing climate change, we need to work in a more community-orientated way in social work practice. So I'll hand over to Colin. Stage, thank you.
Thanks, Jane. We're going to move on now to look at the impact of climate change on the communities that we work with and some of the practical steps that we can take. I'm going to start with the one at the bottom there, which is really we have to face up to the fact that in a society as divided as the one that we live in, the rich and the better off can generally, at this stage anyway, immunise themselves from the impacts of climate change. whilst the rest of the population have to put up with the list of things that I'm going to go through now. This morning, Caroline in her presentation pointed to the fact that in the Philippines, 91% of young people are anxious about climate change, and the figure here is much less than that. I find that interesting. In 1816, that's well over 200 years ago nearly, there was a global catastrophe that was felt in the global north. Summer turned to winter. There were snowfalls throughout that summer. The crops all failed. People died in droves because, of course, there was no capacity at that time to share food globally. So across the northern hemisphere, from North America right through Europe, that disaster was felt, and people suffered greatly. Now, it wasn't until something like 50 years ago now that the reasons for that global disaster were discovered. And what actually happened was an island not far from the Philippines called Sambaya blew up. There was a volcanic eruption that killed a lot of people down there, polluted all the seas, and put sulfur in the air that was felt a year later in the global north. And it kind of feels like 1816 in here and now, in the way that we are so complacent about the challenges we face and the catastrophe we face, and the catastrophe already being felt by people throughout the world, and it's impacting on us here. And we've heard lots of examples of that today. So here, poor housing standards. All of you in practice will be familiar with that. Homes that are not properly insulated, homes that are difficult to heat, homes with inadequate and unaffordable heating systems. Poor housing standards themselves lend to health. I'm jumping one. Lend to health issues, and of course we're in a society where our health services are failing for all sorts of reasons. There's a general resource scarcity, rising energy costs, rising staple food prices, all of which are related to climate change in one way or another, and these are impacting on the poor in a way that when I first came into practice in the 1970s, I could never have imagined. We're also, directly as a result of climate change, suffering more examples now. And again, we've heard about this already today, of sudden disaster, flooding, fire. Fire's not such a big problem in this country. It is in some parts, but they tend to be remote rural parts where not many people live, in the north of Scotland and so on. But certainly flooding and drought are affecting us now. So are sudden snowfalls. I was impacted by that where I live, on an island where we had a sudden snowfall that paralysed everything. And I live in a community which went without power for an entire week because all the power lines were brought down. And I'll tell you in a minute about how we dealt with that. So these are things that we're all contending with and are perhaps not preparing for quite enough. The other thing that's impacting us, and again we've heard about this extensively today, is migration from the global south to the global north, caused by wars and all sorts of things, but largely related to climate change. So all of this kind of reflects the inequalities in society, all the ways these things impact on people. So one of the things we need to do, and this is a practical step that we can all be involved in, because it's an emergency planning duty on all local authorities, and we should be involving ourselves, those of us that work in local authorities, we should be ensuring that social work has a place in the discussions that take place. Jane talked about de-individualizing problems and addressing the needs of people collectively. Food banks and food sharing is one aspect of this, of resilience building. Now, I put out, I'll talk about our book in a minute, but I put out a call about a year ago to people, and some of you here responded to that, asking whether anybody knew about food sharing projects. And I got loads of responses back of people, from social workers and people involved in the world of social work who knew about food sharing projects and could point to them and point to the way that they were helping people in their localities. There's lots of different ways. The co-op, for instance, all co-op supermarkets invite people to go along there in the evening, through organisations, not as individuals, to go along and collect food and then distribute it. Any co-op in the country will do that if they're approached organisationally, and many communities already do that. My own community do that. I'm involved in a food sharing scheme. There are other food sharing organisations throughout the country, and I think there's a national food share organisation. Emergency planning participation, I started talking about that a minute ago. I got out of sequence. But we need to ensure that our social worker voice is involved in that, because the fact is that where there is local participation in emergency planning, it's very likely to be dominated by the voices of those with interests, business interests or those with property interests. And the voice of the dispossessed and the marginalised will not be heard. And one of our duties, I believe, is to ensure that that voice is there, possibly through advocacy, but almost certainly through encouraging people to participate in those emergency planning processes. And if they're not taking place, then they should be, particularly if you're in a low-lying area near the sea and could be prone to flooding, or if you're in an area where there's a high risk of other things through climate change, be it fire or drought or whatever, depending where you live in the country. We should also, and back to these ideas about green social work that Jane talked about, we should be contributing to some of the social and political action around climate change. And there are lots of examples, a lot of writing about green social work and about climate change from a social work perspective that suggests it's almost a duty of social workers who consider themselves activists to get involved in that. And I'm not necessarily talking here about the stop oil type activity. Because if you're a delivery driver on a 0-hour contract, the last thing you want is to be held up on your way round by stop oil activists blocking the road. However well-intentioned that kind of activity might be, it does not go down well with the kind of people that we look after in our communities. So let's be tactical about that, and let's always bear in mind the needs of the people we work with rather than our own ideals. Another aspect of this kind of stuff that we can get ourselves involved in communities is through reducing food waste. I've talked about food sharing schemes already. There are also schemes, and I think there's another workshop going on about community gardens and community gardens schemes. When I was researching for the community social work book, I came across social workers in Northern Ireland involved in a medical practice in Derry, and who've done the most amazing work involving patients in their own care and in all sorts of activities for their own well-being and building social solidarity in that part of the world. And one of the things that they've been involved in is establishing a community garden. Now, those of you that were in the intergenerational workshop earlier on will have heard about the benefits of intergenerational collaboration and bringing people together. And that's what they've done in the community garden. So there's all sorts of spin-offs from that type of activity, quite apart from just producing cheap food that people can use and grow for themselves. Community cafes, they're springing up all over the place. I loved the example from the movie The Old Oak, and if you haven't seen it, go and see it. Take a box of hankies with you because you'll need them. But the way in which that illustrated how marginalized people, both those who found themselves in this country against their wishes and against their will and against everything they might have hoped for in life, coming together in a community where they were not welcomed, because these are communities, it's a mining community in the northeast of England, itself dispossessed and marginalized. And so there were all sorts of tensions there. And what the film illustrates is a means by which people were brought together and social solidarity was created. An absolutely marvelous film, and it shows how that kind of thing, and we should be involved in it. That's not something we should just be regarding as the property of the third sector or the property of voluntary organisations. We as social workers should be involved in that kind of initiative because it brings people together and it looks after the issues on a preventative basis of the people that finish up as our clients. So we can all be involved in stuff like that. Also, my mother lives well, she died now. She lived in South Devon. And I'm down there visiting. There's a place called Devon Refurnish. It's just a simple shop, big shop, full of furniture and other things. And they give out for free school uniforms based on the profits they make from other things, the small profits. They lend out suits and clothes for people to wear to funerals and weddings. They do the most amazing work, and it's just a small local setup. And that kind of thing, social workers should be encouraging people to use these things and supporting them in whatever way they can. And another example I've come across, much, much bigger, is the Cottage Centre in Kirkcaldy. Now, they've gone into a partnership with Amazon. You know, Amazon in Dunfermline, who have a huge warehouse there, and they redistribute lines that are no longer needed. Brand new stuff, brand new gear, white goods and the rest of it, no longer needed, and they distribute it to people in their community. And that idea apparently is spreading across the country. And through the Cottage Centre, I know that community social workers in Fife were involved in that. Sadly, their project has been wound up. Fuel poverty, I touched on that earlier. And fuel poverty is, there are ways in which we can combat that. Not necessarily buying into wind farms and really ambitious stuff like that. But there are schemes, and I came across one in South London, in Brixton, where an energy company that was set up that employed and trained up and employed unemployed local people. It was based around a notion of community wealth building. And a lot of people who were marginalised and dispossessed became involved in that. And the whole community benefited from the energy that was created in that. And we should be taking an interest in these things and not leaving it to other people, because the impact of the work that people through projects like that are doing impact on the people that we finish up looking after in a preventative way. And that's really the whole message of this. Warmth centres, a really simple thing. I mean, we need one in here, actually. But in the winter, I mean, seriously, and many of you will know of warmth centres and the communities you work in, but they are really needed now. But not just to warm people up and give people that, you know, meet that basic Maslow hierarchical need, but also the social solidarity that can emerge from bringing people together. to start to talk about issues and begin to look at ways that people can help one another. Absolutely fantastic. And then, of course, the very final thing is we should be helping people pay their bills if they can't pay them. Now, the Scottish government, well, UK government had a scheme at one point. I think it's been wound up now, of helping reduce the cost of energy. Scottish government have had similar schemes. In my day as a social worker, we used social work monies to pay people's bills if that was absolutely necessary. But that's a very obvious way to alleviate poverty. We shouldn't sidestep that and say it's not our business. Now, the issue of climate refugees, we've heard a lot about that today. Climate refugees, I haven't heard this mentioned though. People that seek asylum here can seek asylum under the Geneva Convention that was established after the war on the basis that they're escaping war or persecution. Escaping climate change is not covered by the Geneva Convention. So if you come to the UK and claim asylum because where you live is suffering drought or flooding, you'll get bombed out. You will not be allowed to claim asylum. You'll be sent back wherever it is you've come from. Because of the link between all these things and war, usually people can claim persecution and war if that's the circumstance they can find themselves in. But I find it absolutely appalling that that now, in this day and age, people cannot claim asylum because they're climate refugees. And if you look at those figures, they are absolutely horrifying. If we keep going the way we're going, just look at the numbers of people who will be displaced because of climate change. And we, as social workers, we should not be involved in separating the deserving from the undeserving when it comes to refugees. Anybody seeking asylum in this country or coming here as a refugee should be treated in the same way, whether they're Ukrainian white people who we can, you know, through the horrific stuff on the news, possibly kind of associate with, or whether they're people from the Horn of Africa who are escaping war, poverty and drought. We shouldn't be judging them and where they come from and separating, compartmentalizing them up. We should be regarding them all in the same way with the same dignity and offering them as much at the same level of support as we possibly can. So it's not our job to foster hierarchies of refugees. And we should avoid doing that, because to do so supports the hostile environment that BASW and all the organisations, the trade unions that we're members of, are opposed to. So this is my last slide. It's really drawing attention to the book, which Jane has contributed a chapter on social work education. And it's a book that brings together all this stuff about community social worker. There's an entire chapter in it devoted to climate change and its impact and what we can do about it. And I'm really pleased to say we've got flyers here, if you haven't already picked one up. That book is coming out in September and you will get it. Oh, sorry. Thanks for pointing that out. That book, coming out in September, you can get it for half price. If you use the promotional code on the flyer and you get it, you order it before the end of this month. So if you haven't already got a flyer, we've got loads here. So please take advantage of that. And I'm going to hand you back to Jane.
Great. Thank you very much. There are some flyers at the front, so we'll try and distribute them if people are interested. We've got a little bit of time left, and we were conscious that at this point in the day, everyone's head's full and people are probably beginning to feel a bit fatigued, having had to think about all this complex and difficult stuff. So we didn't want to use our full quota for just us talking. So there's lots of people in this room, perhaps more people than we imagined. So we just thought we'd pause and allow a little bit of time for people to perhaps just have a discussion informally with the people around you, maybe using these points for reflection as a kind of starting point. But I also know that sometimes when you get chatting with people around you, as I just did in the previous workshop, your discussions may go off in different directions, but just a chance really to kind of embed and think and talk through with colleagues. Some of the questions on here are quite basic. We're aware of that, so please, like I say, don't feel that you're stuck to these questions. But maybe just if you can sort of gather people around you and have a discussion, maybe for 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll draw people back and take some feedback. And I think there might be time for questions, and including the colleagues who are joining us online as well. Oh, sorry.
Reflects on that. We have some questions and comments from online. Okay. But of course, having the mic gives me a position of control. So I can also say that one of the things that BASW has been helping promote is an initiative called Promote the Vote, which started in Bradford and has subsequently been supported by Learning Disability England and the Principal Social Workers Network in England, which is about supporting people with a learning disability to register and to vote. And I understand that a large number of students have been involved in that activity. And to my mind, traditional community social work is about getting people out to vote. Yeah, so that's one reflection. We have a couple of comments here from Tracy. Hi, I am a social work master's student and I agree with what is being said on the live stream, as I went into social work believing it was all community based, but then it was drilled into you to make the decision if you are going to work with adults or children. And she adds, when I went in with the prospects and mentality of working with anyone and not being in a position to pick and choose. Comment well made, I think. We also have a very interesting question. A lot of social workers who work in the UK who qualified abroad, diaspora communities, often remark to us about, they want to practice community social work and don't have the opportunities here. So the question is, what contribution can overseas qualified social workers make to practice in the UK where they might have more experience of community social work? The other thing is, if you want to ask questions or reflect, let me get the mic to you, because otherwise the people joining us online can't actually hear you. But I'll let the speakers come back on that point about diaspora community social work, and I'll be here with the mic for people who want to comment and reflect.
Yeah, at last year's BASW conference, there was actually a workshop from social workers who I think were from Hong Kong, talking about this issue. And I guess what we've got to try and avoid is any idea that they know less than we do because they come from somewhere else. When some of the issues that social workers from Hong Kong are really familiar with are ones that we are dealing with here and now too. So we should be, I guess, seeking out their expertise. And similarly with social workers from other places who are facing the problems that we are going to be contending with, if not already, and seeking out their knowledge and expertise and using it certainly for training purposes and to help prepare us for the stuff that we need to do. So I think that's a really good contribution that from online, and it's something we should be thinking about.
And I think for someone in my position, it's a surprise to find myself working at university in a lecturing role. But what that does allow me to do is, for example, seek out colleagues that might be willing to come and literally contribute to programmes, so to the social work programme I'm on, and it'll be the same for other lecturers. So inviting people who have got that different experience to literally come and help us in a classroom setting here and learn about that in a very practical way. So there are ways that we can harness that kind of expertise that we have across our communities, I think, and we should really be seeking out ways to do that.
Ooh. I think you had your hand first up.
Thanks very much, and thank you for a great presentation. I just wanted to comment on one of the slides where you talked about the food redistribution programs and also furniture upcycling, and you gave the story about Amazon. I have two colleagues that are working on PhDs, one on food waste and another one on circular economy with social work. They're PhDs in social work on those two topics. And just to give a cautionary tale, that what they're finding is that a lot of these programs can actually fuel more unsustainability. So for example, if Tesco's knows that it can get rid of its old bread, it's going to keep on producing more bread, which is going to make everything unsustainable. Or circular economies, like the Amazon is getting rid of their old things, but they're producing brand new ones when really they should be selling the old ones. You know what I mean? Yeah. So just to be careful that as social workers, we don't become part of the greenwashing and we don't become part of the problem.
That's a great point.
Because especially just on that, we're also colleagues. Yeah, with these sustainable development goals now, a lot of businesses have to show that they are doing something good for the environment, socially, or the ecology, whatever, and they're using social work services to push their agendas, this greenwashing. So I think, yeah, exactly that. We do have to be really careful who we side with, because those food banks are needed, but there's a bigger structural issue. Why can't people afford to buy the food that they want, not the mouldy bread that people who can afford bread can buy?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of that relies on political action, and I think we are acknowledging that as social workers, we're not politicians, and we can't determine policy. We can campaign against it through our organisations and trade unions and join the collective voices that are opposing capitalist development. But in our work, we can't do much about it, but we can do something about relieving the conditions of people who are suffering hugely because of the horrors of the system that we're involved in.
And there's a scrum developing for the mic, which is absolutely great. So, who had their hand up first after the lady in the pink cardigan? Somebody did. Was it? I think it was you. Yes. It'll come back. Don't worry.
It's not an easy job, is it? No.
Thank you. I'm Lisa Smith. I work for the NSPCC on a project called Together for Childhood in Grimsby, which is in the northeast. I'd just like to say thank you, Jane and Colin, not only for your presentation, but for your work that you've been doing that has influenced the practice in Grimsby. Jane, you know that, but Colin, you didn't probably know that. So particularly the community social work approach that we have taken. Just some examples of how we have really thought about social justice and inequality. So we found out about a community repair cafe that started in Belfast, and the community repair cafe repairs items that have been broken for the community, that the community come in and bring the items and that they're repaired for free. Not only does it stop landfill, but it also mitigates poverty, but also loneliness and isolation, because it brings community members together. And I'm really pleased to say that one of our community organisations took that on board locally. We highlighted it to them, that they took it on, and they've just won an environmental award for the work they're doing, and it's absolutely, it's really, really taken off. The other thing is, I think I think it was Jane that you highlighted the Joseph Rowntree. It might not have been you, but I'm going to just give you it anyway.
I'll take it.
The Joseph Rowntree project about the £1 million challenge, about putting unclaimed benefits back into the pockets of people who deserve them. So we started a challenge to put the £1 million back into the pockets of areas of high deprivation for welfare benefits that they are entitled to, but they're not claiming, and so we're seeing lots of money going back into pockets where they've not actually understood or realised that the benefits are for them. And then you mentioned about voting. In one of our wards, the turnout rate for the local elections recently was 12%. I think I was just absolutely shocked by that. And the rhetoric that strategic leaders were saying was, this is the just what we're faced with in terms of people's understanding and actual ability to go out, and really they're not really that bothered. We know that nearly 70% of that adult population don't own vehicles, so they've probably not got ID. And so we're doing we've been doing a campaign to support people to get the ID and the relevant documentation so they can vote. I think that's really important, that they feel that they have a voice, and that we think their voice is important as well. And just the last thing that I was going to say, but I've just lost my notes, so it couldn't have been dead important. But the community social work approach for us is really working in terms of relationships, and we go work alongside the community. We don't think that we're the experts. The community are the experts in their own lives, and we go alongside and ask them what it is that we can do to support that expertise, and we do that from a relational approach. And so for us, the community social work methodology is really seeing and paying dividends. So thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
And this lady has been waiting a little while, and we got the 8-minute warning.
Oh.
Okay, I'll try and be brief. Thank you enormously for that. It was so encouraging, definitely buying your book. I'd like to, I suppose I should say that I'm a social worker in the voluntary and independent sector. So I work for a charity that engages in restorative practice and community circles, and I'm hoping that there's a chapter in your book that progresses to that principle for consulting and engaging and involving people together alongside each other. So partnerships between statutory and voluntary, partnerships in all kinds of different crisscrossing networking ways that are so desperately needed for these troubled times. And so that would have been illustrated here if we all sat in a circle, for example. I know it's difficult to arrange these things. And I know that community conferencing is one of the things that's going to be talked about in the climate child protection session tomorrow. And I think that conferencing, like family group conferencing, but for communities, is perhaps one of the ways forward that you're pointing to.
Thank you.
Can I just say something in response to your contribution? The book makes a big push for community social work being part of mainstream social work services. So there's a big deliberate emphasis on that, because at the moment community social work initiatives tend to be very poorly funded and managed generally through the third sector on a kind of year by year, very insecure basis. And I think what one of the intentions of our book is to try and move the conversation on to people demanding that it's a part of mainstream service provided by local authorities.
Especially since local authorities use the word community so frequently.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. Thank you.
I've got the mic. Yes, thank you very much for that. It was a really brilliant presentation. I'm very lucky that I trained as a social worker when you could still do an elective in community work, and I got to do an elective in community work, and it's paid dividends in terms of the climate stuff. So before I did the climate child protection team, I was involved in establishing a network of climate community hubs around the country, which was very much embedded in that community work and sort of giving people, empowering communities. Yeah, there was a couple of things I wanted to say. I wanted to pick up on the Just Stop Oil comment. My daughter once told me that she's very, very wise, my daughter. She's a teenager, so they are all wise. She said she was fed up of hysterical adults screaming about how we were all going to die. And I think she makes a very good point there, the need for social workers to step in, because we are the people that do step in and face things and do it in a healthy, careful, considered and fair way, and that needs to happen. And I think that's what I hear from what she said. Just in terms of us picking up on what you just said as well, because we're doing the climate child protection workshop tomorrow, and we are going to be focusing very much on the contextual safeguarding as a way to apply and start to develop that community conferencing communities, because we need to protect our children at the community level. Yeah. That's what, because this is not something in families.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
And we have a 3-minute warning. I think you're probably the last lady. However, technological conundrum here. Can the discount code for the community social work book be shared for those of us who have joined virtually, please?
Yeah, if I read out the promo code.
Oh, it's already happened.
It's already done. Brilliant.
Colleagues have done.
There we go.
Wow, head of the game.
Thanks.
So I'll try not to overrun the 3 minutes. So thanks very much, Colin and Jane. It's been really interesting. I'm Anya Morrison. I'm the Chief Social Worker in Northern Ireland, and I just wanted to share a couple of things that we're working on. We are very much trying to grow a community social work approach, and we see that as an important part of also growing a social justice approach in social work as well in Northern Ireland. So a couple of things that we have found particularly helpful. So we have established a post-qualifying programme in social work and community development. It's very popular. Haven't quite worked out yet how we're going to fund it long term, but at the minute we're still going.
But please do,
year to year,
because we think it's great.
But what I would say is, so one of the motivations for that programme, and it was only one of them, but was that we have a new breed of social work in Northern Ireland, which is social workers in primary care, and their brief is very, very clearly about community development, as well as other things, but very clear community development brief. So part of the motivation was we wanted that course to support them to build that work. But equally, we are also targeting it at people who are in child protection teams, in mental health teams, and learning disability teams as well. And actually, that has grown really well as well. So I suppose the message we're trying to give out is community development isn't just about social, sort of mainstream social work, or that sort of, that it does belong in all areas of social work. And the other thing, if you'll forgive me a little plug, we have in Northern Ireland we have a reflections series, which are reflections on, I suppose, what we see as good social work practice and how we want to promote and support people in their practice. And we have one on social work and community development, and it's available on the Department of Health, the Northern Ireland website.
Thank you. I think, just for information, I think, I know, but the post-qualifying programme is mentioned in the book as an example of excellent ideas and practice in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, we love it.
Yeah.
We love it. Yeah, and your streets ahead of us in the rest of the UK in that respect.
And what better way to end than with community social work plug from Chief Social Worker. So thank you so much. Round of applause, everybody.
Thanks, Colin.